This contract will destroy someone's life. The girl's voice wasn't loud, but it cut clean through the glass-walled conference room like a crack in polished marble. For a moment, no one moved. Not the attorneys in tailored suits, not the investors leaning back in leather chairs, not even Richard Holloway himself, who stood at the head of the 40-foot table with a crystal glass paused midair. Then came the laughter, soft at first, then louder, spreading like a ripple across the room. Richard lowered his drink slowly, his sharp blue eyes settling on the source. She stood near the far end of the table, small against the skyline pouring in from the Manhattan windows, her dark curls pulled into neat braids, a worn canvas backpack hanging from one shoulder. Naomi Carter didn't look like she belonged in a room where deals were measured in millions and silence carried more weight than words, but she didn't step back either. Richard tilted his head, amused. "That's a serious accusation," he said, his voice smooth, practiced, the kind that closed billion-dollar negotiations without raising a single decibel. "You even know what you're looking at." A few chuckles followed. Someone muttered, "Kid probably thinks it's a homework packet." Naomi's fingers rested lightly on the thick stack of paper in front of her. Hundreds of pages clipped and tabbed, dense with clauses, signatures, and fine print that most people in the room hadn't fully read themselves. She didn't flinch. "I know enough," she said quietly. That was when something shifted just slightly in the air. Richard smiled, but didn't reach his eyes. "All right," he said, setting his glass down with a soft click that echoed louder than expected. "Let's make this interesting." He gestured toward the contract, then toward the digital clock glowing on the wall. "Read every page of that in 10 minutes, he said, his tone now carrying a trace of challenge, of spectacle. "Understand it. Explain it. And if you're right, if you can prove there's something wrong with it, I'll give you $2 million. The room stilled, then buzzed again, sharper this time. Phones shifted slightly on the table. Someone leaned forward. Another whispered, "He's actually doing this." Naomi didn't look at the clock. She didn't look at the people watching her. Her gaze stayed on the contract, as if it were something far more familiar than it should have been. "And if I'm not?" she asked. Richard's smile widened just enough. "Then you walk out that door," he said, nodding toward the polished glass exit behind her. "And we all forget this little interruption ever happened." A pause. The kind that stretches just long enough for doubt to settle in. Naomi adjusted the strap of her backpack, then stepped forward, placing both hands flat on the first page. "Deal," she said. A few people laughed again, but it sounded thinner now, less certain. The timer on the wall blinked as someone, somewhere, started the countdown. 10 minutes. 600 seconds. Naomi took a breath, slow and steady, and then she began, not reading the way they expected, not line by line or word by word, but scanning, absorbing, her eyes moving with a precision that didn't match her age. Pages turned. Not rushed, not careless, but deliberate. Every few seconds, she paused, not in confusion, but in recognition. Richard watched from the head of the table, his expression still composed, but his fingers no longer touched his glass. The room grew quieter with each passing second, the earlier amusement thinning into something else, something harder to name. Outside, traffic moved along Fifth Avenue, horns distant, life continuing as usual. Inside, every second seemed louder than the last. And somewhere between the turning pages and the ticking clock, the balance in the room began to shift, though no one could yet explain why. The ticking of the digital clock grew sharper with every passing second, each number change echoing faintly against the glass walls, as if the room itself was counting down with it. 9 minutes and 12 seconds remained. Naomi turned another page, her fingers steady, her movements almost too controlled for a child. Around the table, the earlier amusement had begun to shift into something quieter, something edged with curiosity. One of the junior attorneys leaned closer to the contract in front of him, flipping to the same section she had just passed, his brow tightening as if trying to follow her path. Richard noticed it. He said nothing, but his posture straightened slightly, his attention no longer casual. Naomi did not rush. She moved through the document with a rhythm that felt deliberate, her eyes not reading every word but tracing patterns, connections, structure. Every few pages, she paused for just a fraction of a second, as if confirming something already forming. In her mind, she is skipping sections, someone whispered near the far end of the table. No one reads like that. Another voice answered under their breath. She is not reading. She is mapping it. 8 minutes and 20 seconds. Naomi reached page 47. Her hand stopped. Not dramatically, not with hesitation, but with precision. Her eyes narrowed slightly, scanning a single paragraph again, slower this time. Across the table, a man in a gray suit let out a quiet chuckle, leaning back in his chair. There it is, he said softly. That is where it breaks. A few others nodded, relieved, as if the world had just returned to something familiar. Richard allowed a faint smile to return, folding his hands loosely in front of him. But Naomi did not look up. She turned the page. Then another, and another. The pause had not been confusion. It had been confirmation. 7 minutes and 10 seconds. The room grew still again, but this time no one laughed. Even the city outside seemed distant now, the faint hum of traffic reduced to a low murmur beneath the weight of anticipation. Naomi's fingers brushed the edges of the paper, her movements consistent, her breathing even. She reached the final section faster than anyone expected, the last pages thinner, filled with signatures and attachments that most people would have ignored. She did not. She slowed again, just slightly, her eyes moving line by line, connecting what came before to what ended here. 6 minutes and 3 seconds. She closed the contract. The sound was soft, but landed heavily in the silence. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Then a man near the center of the table let out a short laugh, uncertain, almost defensive. That is it, he said. She is done. Naomi lifted her head. Her gaze moved across the room, not searching, not unsure, but steady. Then it stopped on Richard. You built this to look clean, she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried clearly, each word measured. But it is not. The faint smile on Richard's face did not disappear, but it shifted, tightening at the edges. You have 4 minutes left, he replied smoothly. Take your time. Explain. Naomi placed one hand on the contract again, tapping lightly near the center, as if marking a starting point only she could see. Page 47, she said. Line 12. A ripple moved through the room as several people reached for their copies at once, flipping pages, scanning quickly, their earlier confidence slipping into urgency. Naomi continued before they could speak. It looks like a standard liability clause, she said, but it references a definition buried on page 12, which changes what responsibility actually means. A pause. The sound of pages turning grew louder. Someone whispered, sharper now, wait. Naomi did not raise her voice. She did not need to. And that definition connects to an amendment on page 83, she added, which no one reads, because it is written like a footnote. The room fell completely silent. Richard's fingers tightened slightly against the table, just enough for the movement to be noticed. Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. It is not a contract, she said. It is a system. The word hung in the air longer than anyone expected. A system, not a contract, not a deal. A system. The digital clock on the wall blinked down to 5 minutes and 18 seconds, but no one looked at it anymore. Every eye in the room was locked on Naomi. Across the table, pages flipped faster now, no longer casual, no longer confident. One of the senior attorneys leaned forward sharply, scanning page 12, then 47, then 83, his lips parting slightly as the connections began to surface. That cannot be right, he murmured, but his voice lacked conviction. Naomi did not move. She stood still, one hand resting lightly on the contract, as if the entire structure of it lived beneath her fingertips. Richard Holloway's expression remained controlled, but something deeper had shifted behind his eyes. The easy amusement was gone. In its place was calculation. Explain the system, he said, his tone even, but quieter now, more focused. Naomi nodded once, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. It starts with the definition on page 12, she said. Responsibility is redefined to include indirect outcomes, not just direct actions. A few heads lifted at that. Someone whispered, "That is not standard." Naomi continued, her voice steady, her pace deliberate. Then page 47 uses that definition to transfer liability in a way that looks conditional, but it is not. It is automatic. Paper shifted again. A pen dropped somewhere, the sound sharp in the silence. In page 83, Naomi said, tapping the edge of the document lightly, "Locks it in." It removes the ability to challenge the definition by placing it under a secondary clause that overrides dispute rights. This time, no one laughed. The man in the gray suit who had spoken earlier leaned forward again, but now his confidence had drained completely. "That means," he began, then stopped, unable to finish. Naomi finished it for him. "It means the person signing this does not just agree to terms," she said. "They give up the right to question how those terms are used later." The room seemed to shrink around the table. Even the light coming through the windows felt colder now, sharper against the polished surfaces. Richard's fingers rested flat against the glass, no longer relaxed. "That is a strong interpretation," he said carefully. Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. "It is not an interpretation," she replied. "It is design." Another silence followed, heavier than the last. One of the attorneys flipped rapidly through his copy again, stopping abruptly, his eyes widening just enough to confirm what he had found. He looked up at Richard, but said nothing. He did not need to. Naomi took a small breath, her voice softening just slightly, but not losing its clarity. "You connect the clauses so no one sees the full picture unless they read everything together," she said. "But no one does that. Not in 10 minutes. Not even in an hour." The digital clock blinked again. For minutes and 2 seconds. Naomi's eyes did not leave Richard. "Except someone who already knows what it looks like," she added quietly. That was the moment the room shifted again, not just in tension, but in meaning. The words did not accuse, but they pointed somewhere deeper, somewhere personal. Richard's jaw tightened just slightly, a movement small enough to miss if you were not watching closely. "And how would you know that?" he asked. The question was calm, but it carried weight. Naomi did not answer immediately. Her fingers traced the edge of the contract once more, then stilled. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but something underneath it had changed. "Because I've seen this system before," she said. And this time, no one in the room doubted her. The silence did not break this time. It deepened, settling over the room like something heavy and irreversible. Naomi's words lingered in the air, not loud, not dramatic, but impossible to ignore. Richard Holloway did not look away from her. He did not interrupt. For the first time since the challenge began, he was not controlling the pace of the room. "Where?" he asked finally, his voice low, precise. It was not disbelief. It was something else now. Naomi held his gaze, her expression steady, but her fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the contract. "A smaller firm," she said. "Not like this. Not glass walls and skyline views." Her eyes flickered briefly toward the window, then back to him. But the structure was the same. A faint shift moved through the people seated around the table. Someone leaned closer. Someone else stopped flipping pages altogether. They were no longer searching the document. They were listening. Naomi continued, her voice calm, but carrying something deeper beneath it now, something that felt lived, not studied. "They said it was a standard agreement," she said. "They said everything was clear, that nothing was hidden." She paused, just for a second, the kind of pause that was not hesitation, but memory. But it was not clear. Not really. The digital clock blinked down to 3 minutes and 12 seconds, unnoticed. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. Naomi's eyes dropped to the contract again, tracing the pages without turning them this time. "The person signing trusted the structure," she said. "They trusted the language. They thought if something was wrong, they would see it." Her voice softened just slightly, but the system was not built to be seen. A man near the far end of the table exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair as if something inside him had just shifted. Another attorney lowered his pen entirely, no longer pretending to take notes. Naomi looked up again, directly at Richard. "It is not about how fast you read," she said. "It is about whether you know what you're looking for." Richard's fingers pressed flat against the glass surface of the table, the reflection beneath them sharp and still. "And you know," he said. It was not a question. Naomi nodded once. "Yes." A pause stretched between them, quieter than anything before, but heavier. "Because of that firm?" he asked. Naomi shook her head slightly. "Because of what happened after," she replied. The words did not rise. They settled. Around the room, no one moved. Even the faint hum of electronics seemed distant now, as if the space itself had narrowed to just the two of them and the truth hanging between them. Naomi's voice did not break. It did not tremble, but carried weight. "The contract did not look dangerous," she said, "but it changed everything." Richard's gaze did not waver, but something behind it shifted again, something less guarded, more aware. "And you are saying this one does the same," he said. Naomi placed her hand flat on the document once more. "I am saying it is built the same way," she answered. The clock blinked again. 2 minutes and 28 seconds. No one mentioned the time. No one reminded her of the money. That part of the room had disappeared entirely. Richard leaned forward just slightly now, no longer standing above the moment, but inside it. "Then show me," he said quietly. Naomi nodded, her fingers moving to the center of the contract, tracing a line only she could see. "You do not lose everything at once," she said. "You lose it step by step, clause by clause." She looked up at him one more time, her voice calm, but final. "That is how the system works." And for the first time since the challenge began, the room did not feel like a game at all. Naomi's finger moved slowly across the page, not rushing, not hesitating, tracing the invisible path that connected everything together. The room leaned in with her, every person at that table now following the same lines they had ignored before. "Clause 14, she said quietly, tapping near the middle of the document. "This is where it begins." A man to her left flipped to the section quickly, scanning, his lips moving as he read. "It looks standard," he said, though his voice no longer carried certainty. Naomi nodded. "It looks like it protects the company from external risk," she said. "That is what you are meant to believe." She slid her finger slightly down the page. "But it references subsection 14.3, which redirects liability through the definition on page 12. Paper shifted again, faster now, more urgent. Someone whispered, "I missed that." Naomi continued, her tone steady, almost instructional now, but never condescending. "Then clause 22 builds on it," she said. "It creates a condition where any dispute automatically defaults to the company's interpretation." A quiet breath moved through the room, sharp and collective. Richard's eyes followed her hand without interruption. "So even if someone notices," he said slowly, "they cannot challenge it." Naomi looked up at him. "Not effectively," she replied, "because clause 22 is reinforced by the amendment on page 83. The same page, the same hidden lock, the same design." A senior attorney near the end of the table leaned forward abruptly, his chair shifting against the polished floor. He flipped to page 83 again, scanning faster this time, then slower, then stopping completely. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. Enough for everyone else to see. Naomi did not need to look. She already knew. "It removes external review," she said. "It limits arbitration. It narrows every possible way out." The digital clock blinked down to 1 minute and 39 seconds, but the number felt meaningless now. No one was counting. No one cared about the time. Naomi's hand rested flat against the contract again, grounding the moment. "Individually, each clause looks reasonable," she said. "Together, they close every door." A long silence followed, the kind that does not come from confusion, but from recognition. Richard's gaze did not leave her. There was no smile now, no trace of the earlier challenge. "And the person signing this," he said, his voice quieter than before, "would not realize it until later." Naomi nodded once. "Until it is already in motion," she said. A man near the center of the table let out a slow breath, leaning back as if something inside him had just settled into place. Another lowered his head, staring at the contract as though it had changed in his hands. Naomi's eyes moved across the room briefly, taking in the shift, the silence, the absence of laughter. Then she returned her focus to Richard. "You asked me to read every page," she said. "But the truth is, you do not need to read every word." She tapped the document lightly once more. "You need to understand how the pages speak to each other." Richard's fingers pressed slightly harder against the glass, the reflection beneath them no longer steady. "And you understood it in less than 10 minutes, he said. Naomi did not answer right away. She looked down at the contract one more time, then back at him. "No," she said softly. "I understood at the moment I saw the structure." The words settled over the room, quiet but absolute. The clock blinked again. 58 seconds. But the challenge had already ended, long before the time ran out. And for the first time since Naomi Carter had stepped into that room, Richard Holloway did not look like the man in control. The final seconds on the clock slipped away unnoticed as the room remained suspended in a silence that no one dared to break. 57 seconds became 40, then 30, but the challenge no longer belonged to time. It belonged to truth. Richard Holloway slowly straightened, his gaze still locked on Naomi, but something in his posture had shifted. He was no longer standing above the moment. He was inside it. "You said you have seen this before," he said, his voice measured, but no longer distant. "Where did you learn to see it like this?" Naomi did not answer immediately. Her fingers rested on the contract, but her focus had moved somewhere else, somewhere beyond the glass walls and polished floors. "Not in a classroom," she said quietly. A faint murmur moved through the room, but it faded as quickly as it came. No one wanted to interrupt what was unfolding. Naomi lifted her hand from the document and let it fall gently to her side. "It was not explained to me," she continued. "It was not taught." She looked back at Richard, her expression steady, but her eyes carried something deeper now, something that did not belong to theory or practice. "I learned it by watching what happens after people sign." A stillness followed that felt heavier than anything before. One of the attorneys shifted in his chair, but did not speak. Another lowered his gaze entirely, as if the contract in front of him now held more than just words. Richard did not look away. "And what happens?" he asked. The question was quiet, but it carried weight. Naomi took a small breath. "At first, nothing," she said. "Everything looks normal. Payments go through. Agreements hold. People think they made the right decision." Her voice remained calm, but there was something beneath it now, something that lingered between each word. Then the structure starts to move. She tapped the edge of the contract lightly, not as a demonstration this time, but as a reminder. A clause activates. Then another. Each one small. Each one reasonable on its own. The room listened without a sound. "And by the time someone realizes something is wrong," she continued, "they're already inside it." A man near the far end of the table closed his eyes briefly, as if the image had become too clear. Naomi's gaze did not leave Richard. "They try to fix it," she said. "They try to ask questions. They try to get help." A pause. "But the system does not allow it." The words settled slowly, firmly, leaving no space for dismissal. Richard's hand moved slightly across the table, not reaching for anything, just shifting, as if grounding himself in the moment. "You are speaking from experience," he said. Naomi nodded once. "Yes." Another silence followed, but this one was different. It was not tension. It was understanding, or at least the beginning of it. "Who signed it?" Richard asked. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly at her side, the only visible change in her posture. When she answered, her voice did not break. It did not rise. It remained steady. "My mother," she said. The room did not react outwardly, but something changed in the air, something quiet and undeniable. Naomi looked down at the contract for a brief second, then back at Richard. "She trusted it," she added softly, "just like you expect people to." The words were not an accusation. They were a statement, a mirror. Richard's expression did not collapse, but it no longer held any trace of distance. The reflection of the skyline behind Naomi stretched across the glass, blending the world outside with the truth inside the room. "And what happened to her?" he asked. Naomi held his gaze, her voice calm but final. The system worked exactly the way it was designed to. And this time, no one in the room could pretend they did not understand what that meant. The words settled into the room like a weight that could not be lifted, and for a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke, no one even shifted in their seat, as if any motion might break something fragile that had just been revealed. Richard Holloway stood still at the head of the table, his gaze fixed on Naomi, but there was no trace of challenge left in his expression now, only a quiet calculation that felt different, slower, heavier. "Your mother," he repeated, not as a question, but as if testing the truth of it against something inside himself. Naomi nodded once, her posture unchanged, her voice steady. "She signed a contract that looked just like this," she said. "Different company, different names, same structure." A faint breath moved through the room, barely audible, but it carried something with it, something closer to discomfort than curiosity. Naomi continued, her words measured, each one placed carefully. "She believed it would help her," she said. "She thought it was an opportunity." Her eyes dropped briefly to the document, then returned to Richard. "She read it," she added. "Not fast, not careless. She read every page." A few people shifted in their chairs now, the movement subtle but undeniable. Naomi's voice remained calm. "But she did not know how the pages connected," she said. "She did not know what to look for." Richard's hand moved slightly across the table, not reaching, not pulling back, just moving as if grounding himself in the surface beneath him. "And after she signed?" he asked quietly. Naomi did not hesitate. "At first, everything worked," she said. "Just like it was supposed to." The words echoed something she had already explained, but now they carried weight, context, consequence. "Then the conditions started to change," she continued. "Small adjustments, new interpretations, each one supported by the clauses she agreed to." The room listened completely still. Naomi's voice softened, but it did not lose its clarity. "She tried to understand what was happening," she said. "She asked questions. She asked for explanations." A pause followed, brief but heavy. But every answer pointed back to the contract. A man near the center of the table lowered his gaze, staring at the pages in front of him as if they had become something else entirely. Naomi looked at Richard again. "The system did not break," she said. "It did exactly what it was built to do." Richard's jaw tightened slightly, the only visible sign of reaction, but it was enough. Enough for those watching to see that something had shifted inside him. "And you," he said slowly, "you saw all of this." Naomi nodded. "I watched it happen," she said. The words were simple, but they carried something deeper than explanation, something that did not need to be described in detail to be understood. The room felt smaller now, quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding the weight of what had been said. Richard's gaze did not leave her. "So you walked into this room," he said, "already knowing what you would find." Naomi held his gaze, unflinching. "I walked in hoping I was wrong," she replied. A silence followed, longer than any before it. No one shifted. No one spoke. Even the faint hum of the building seemed to fade beneath it. Naomi placed her hand back on the contract, not to prove anything now, but to anchor the moment. "But the structure is the same," she said quietly. "And that means the outcome will be the same." The words did not rise, did not accuse, but they landed with a finality that left no room for dismissal. Richard Holloway stood there, surrounded by glass and skyline and power, but for the first time, it did not feel like control. It felt like exposure. The word exposure lingered in the air like something that could not be taken back. And for a moment, Richard Holloway did not move at all, his reflection faintly visible in the glass table beneath him, fractured by the lines of the contract that now sat between them. No one in the room spoke, not even the attorneys who moments ago had carried certainty in every breath. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of recognition. Richard's eyes shifted briefly, not away from Naomi, but inward, as if searching through something far older than the document in front of him. "How many?" he asked quietly. The question was unexpected, almost out of place, but it landed with weight. Naomi did not need clarification. I do not know the exact number, she said. But enough. A faint exhale moved through the room, subtle but shared. Richard's gaze lowered to the contract for the first time since she began speaking, his fingers brushing the edge of the pages without turning them. And you believe this one would do the same, he said. Naomi shook her head slightly. Not believe, she replied. It will. The certainty in her voice did not rise. It settled, firm and unshaken. Richard's hand stilled. Around the table, no one dared interrupt. Even the people who had drafted the document sat quietly now, their earlier confidence replaced by something far less certain. Naomi stepped slightly closer to the table, not to confront, but to clarify. You designed it so no one sees the full picture, she said, even the people using it. A few heads lifted at that, sharp and alert. Naomi continued, her tone calm, but precise. Each person works on one part, she said. One clause, one definition, one adjustment. She glanced briefly at the attorneys, then back to Richard. But no one steps back to see what it becomes when everything is connected. A long pause followed, and this time it was not just heavy. It was uncomfortable. One of the senior lawyers shifted in his chair, his hand hovering over the contract before slowly pulling back, as if touching it now carried a different meaning. Richard's jaw tightened slightly, but he did not interrupt. Naomi's voice softened just a fraction, not losing strength, but gaining something else, something closer to understanding than accusation. That is how systems like this grow, she said. Not all at once. Piece by piece. Until no one questions it anymore. The room absorbed the words slowly, like something that could not be processed all at once. Richard's gaze lifted from the contract back to Naomi, but it was no longer the same look he had given her at the beginning. There was no trace of amusement, no hint of control, only awareness. And you walked in here alone, he said quietly, knowing all of this. Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. I did not come here alone, she said. The answer was soft, but it shifted something immediately. Richard's brow tightened slightly. What do you mean? Naomi's hand moved to the strap of her worn backpack, gripping it gently, as if grounding herself in something familiar. I came with what I saw, she said. With what happened? She paused, just for a moment, then added, and with what could happen again. The words did not accuse. They warned. A silence followed, deeper than before, as if the room itself understood the weight of that difference. Richard's eyes held on hers, and for the first time, there was no distance left between them. So what do you want? He asked. The question was simple, but it carried everything with it. Naomi did not look at the contract this time. She did not look at the room. She looked only at him. I want you to see it, she said. The whole thing. And in that moment, it was no longer about the contract, or the challenge, or the $2 million. It was about whether the man who built the system was willing to face what it had become. The room did not move, did not breathe, did not even seem to exist beyond the space between them as Naomi's words settled into something final, something that could not be undone. Richard Holloway stood still at the head of the table, his reflection fractured across the glass beneath his hands, his eyes fixed on the girl who had walked into his world and quietly dismantled it piece by piece. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he reached forward and pulled the contract closer to him. The movement was small, but it shifted everything. The man who had once stood above the deal now leaned into it. Page 12. His eyes moved across the definition Naomi had named. Page 47. Line 12. He paused there, longer than anyone expected. Page 83. The amendment. The lock. Around the table, no one spoke. No one interrupted. They watched, not the billionaire, but the process, the unraveling of something that had once felt untouchable. Richard's fingers pressed against the paper, holding it still as if it might shift again if he let go. His jaw tightened slightly, but this time it was not resistance. It was recognition. He leaned back slowly, the contract still open in front of him, the pages no longer just words, but connections he could now see clearly. You are right, he said. The words were quiet, but they carried across the room with absolute clarity. A ripple moved through the space. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. Naomi did not react. She did not smile. She simply watched him, steady and calm. Richard's gaze lifted to meet hers again, and for the first time since she had spoken, there was no distance left in his expression. "This is not clean," he continued. "It is constructed." He exhaled slowly, the weight of the realization settling fully now. "And I approved it." The admission did not break the room. It grounded it. Naomi's hand rested lightly against the edge of the table, her voice soft but certain. "Then you can change it," she said. The simplicity of the statement cut deeper than anything else that had been said. Richard looked down at the contract one more time, then back. At the people seated around him, the attorneys, the advisors, the ones who had built this system piece by piece without ever stepping back to see it whole. Then his hand moved again. This time, there was no hesitation. He closed the contract. The sound echoed softly, but it carried finality. "This deal is off," he said. No one argued. No one questioned. The authority in his voice had not disappeared. It had changed. He turned slightly toward his legal team. "Every agreement built on this structure is to be reviewed," he added. Immediately, a few heads nodded, quickly now, not out of habit, but out of understanding. Richard's gaze returned to Naomi. The challenge, the game, the spectacle, all of it had dissolved. What remained was something quieter, something real. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a check, and placed it gently on the table between them. $2 million. The promise he had made. Naomi looked at it, but she did not reach for it. Richard noticed. "You earned it," he said. Naomi shook her head slightly, her eyes still on his. "I did not come for that," she replied. A pause followed, softer now, but just as powerful. Richard studied her for a moment, then nodded once, slowly. He understood. Not just the contract. Not just the system. Her. Naomi adjusted the strap of her backpack and stepped back from the table, the towering glass windows behind her catching the light as the city continued outside, unchanged and unaware. But inside that room, something had shifted permanently. She turned toward the door, then paused for just a second. "You said 10 minutes, she said quietly, glancing back at the clock. It had long since reached 0. "It only took 1, she added. Then she walked out, leaving behind a contract, a room full of silence, and a man who, for the first time in years, had finally seen the full picture.